We know the saying, a house divided against itself cannot stand. But is that really the case in this instance? Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. The FNM administration has witnessed quite a number of interesting events in office, but one of the most dramatic has been the resignation of House Speaker Halson Moultrie from the Free National Movement. His resignation, dated February 4th and addressed to Secretary General of the FNM, Safant Roll, said that today, with immediate effect, I formally end my 7-month constructive withdrawal from the Free National Movement by tendering my resignation, thereby cancelling my membership. Almost immediately, we all realized that there would be some changes in the way the lower chamber does business. Tonight on The Record, we discuss a House divided as we dive into what it means to have an independent member of Parliament as the Speaker of the House of Assembly. Well, stay tuned. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. And welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and tonight we bring you a House divided. On February 4th, Speaker of the House, Halson Moultrie, resigned from the Free National Movement and became an independent member. But this Speaker is not your average career politician. He has served as the chief meteorologist. That was from 1970 to 1991. Later on in life, he joined O.B. Ferguson and Co., the Trade Union Congress, as a law student and labor consultant. As a labor advocate, he remains connected with the National Congress of Trade Unions and with the Trade Union Congress as a consultant. Here, though, to talk to us and explain his own actions and why he made such a bold step as the member of Parliament for Nassau Village and the 54th Speaker of the House of Assembly, the Honourable Halson Moultrie. Mr. Moultrie, welcome to On the Record. It's an honour to have you with us.
It's a pleasure, Jerome. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss the affairs of the legislative branch of government with respect to advancing and deepening our democracy.
Sir, before we get to, the current state, I have to tell you, I was a little surprised when I saw that you were entering mainstream politics. I knew you as a trade unionist to be very outspoken and an advocate for workers, even throughout my career as a reporter. You and I had many interactions on that level, but I was a bit surprised to see you entering frontline politics. Not that that does not happen, but take us to really what it is that inspired you to enter this realm of politics.
But that takes me back a while. Sir Lyndon Penling, the late Sir Lyndon Penling, invited me to his office in 1991. And he indicated to me that he had received a petition from the people of Great Inagua and that they were requesting that I be named as a candidate for the Progressive Liberal Party. That was a surprise to me. because at that time I had taken some initiative to assist a number of persons in the community who had developed a drug problem, my brother being one of those persons. And the community of Greater Inagua and Meguana felt that I can serve in the capacity of a politician, a member of parliament. And so my interest in politics began at that time. I did serve as the NGC council member for the Progressive Liberal Party for the Inagua Meguana constituency and later became the candidate. After that period, I did, of course, the PLP lost in 92 elections, and I decided that I would go back to my profession, which was meteorology. But I soon discovered that I had an urge to continue to try and develop some systems to cause the Bahamas to become a better democracy that increased the participation of its citizens. Having studied meteorology and in science, we studied systems that produce changes in the environment and in the atmosphere. And right away, I began to understand that there was a difficulty with the way we implemented our systems. I did an analysis of the Bahamas Constitution in 1994, assisted by Alfred Sears, and I soon concluded that the system or the Constitution that we had adopted created a systemic problem because we did not inherit also the conventions of the Westminster model.
So, if I could just for a moment, if you can, because I don't want us to spend too much time in the past, but how you started out with an affiliation with the PLP. Take us now to 2017. You're on the FNM's ticket for Nassau Village. How and why did that happen?
After becoming affiliated with O.B. Ferguson and the trade union movement, I also studied law and became an attorney. I was then invited to a breakfast meeting by Dr. Nigel Lewis and with Dr. Minnis, who invited me to consider a nomination for the Free National Movement in 2017. I indicated to them that I believe that all representatives should either have a connection with their constituency, having been born there, or are living in the constituency. And so I decided I was born in Greater Inagua, and I live in the Nassau Village constituency in the Gleniston Gardens subdivision. I told the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, that I would opt to run in the Nassau Village constituency, and I accepted the nomination from the Free National Movement to run in the Nassau Village constituency. And I'm thankful to the people of the Nassau Village constituency for giving me the opportunity to serve.
FNM wins a decisive victory in 2017. You are elected Speaker. Did you see that coming? And what were your expectations when you agreed to take on such an important role?
Well, first of all, I really didn't see being elected Speaker coming. But as soon as that determination was made and I decided to accept the role, I went about immediately studying the rules of procedure, the Constitution, Westminster model, and also try to do as much research as possible to see how various speakers conducted themselves within the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And thank goodness for technology, you are able to go on YouTube and you can watch the Australian Parliament, the United Kingdom Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, New Zealand Parliament, and so on, Barbados. And so I would watch those proceedings, and I would see and compare the rules of procedure. And I decided right away, based on what I saw happening in the Bahamas, that we had some systemic problems that I set about from the very beginning to try and remedy.
Tell us what those systemic problems are. And I have to tell you, from the very beginning, I think many of us were shocked at what we saw coming from the Speaker's chair, because To be quite honest, sir, I can tell you from my own experience of many years in covering the House of Assembly, you are a different kind of speaker. Or you are a different kind of speaker.
Well, I believe that, particularly at this time, when you want to make changes, it is normally always resistant to changes. And I believe that the Lord allowed me to become the speaker at this time because of my personality, because I am combative and I will fight for what I believe in. And I believe that that is the type of individual that we needed at this time to bring about the changes that are necessary for the deepening of our democracy. This is the first time in the history of our parliament where the speaker and the deputy speaker are both trained attorneys. And so we had lots of discussion.
I just want to hit a pause button for a minute. You spoke to some of the systemic problems, and I take it you're about to get into those. But if you could, for us, really identify what were some of the things that you said from the get-go that, hey, we need to change, or as you put it, we are way behind or in the dark.
Well, number one, after studying the rule books, it became very apparent to me that the rules are written in a way to deny the minority and independents their privilege, first of all, and their constitutional and democratic right to participate fully in the parliamentary proceeding. And so initially, we discovered, first of all, that there were 3 rule books, and there was some confusion about that. I tried to get the parliament eventually to pass a resolution to adopt one of those rule books, and even the one that we adopted is still fundamentally flawed with respect to the constitutional mandate that is given to the legislative branch. What we have descended into, in my estimation, as opposed to having a parliamentary democracy, we have degenerated into an executive aristocracy, where the executive branch of government is controlling both the legislative branch and the judicial branch of the government. And there is virtually no separation of powers. The executive branch controls the administration of the legislative branch, as well as the finances and the budget of the legislative branch.
So tell us why that's a dangerous and a bad thing, sir.
That is extremely dangerous. That should never happen in the Westminster model. It should never happen under the separation of powers. Actually, it is actually forbidden for any one person to function in both branches of government. It will present a natural conflict of interest. For example, the constitutional mandate given to the legislative branch and under Article 72 is to have oversight of the activities of the executive branch. And if the executive branch is controlling the administration of the legislative branch and controlling the budget of the legislative branch, it's almost practically impossible for the legislative branch to carry out its constitutional mandate to have oversight over the executive branch. The executive branch is answerable and responsible to the legislative branch. The parliament is the only institution in the Bahamas where every single citizen is represented. And the executive branch is accountable to the parliament for the expenditure of the taxpayers' money and the stewardship of the taxpayers' assets. Now, if, for example, the executive branch, through these huge cabinets, these supersized or what we call gussie cabinets, are able to walk from the cabinet office into the parliament with a majority of the votes, it completely undermines and defeats the role of the legislative branch. Because instead of being able to check the executive branch is using the parliament as a rubber stamp, where the decision is already made in cabinet, and they are able to outvote the backbenchers and the opposition combined.
To move forward
That
with
should
whatever
never.
agenda they have. So I want to I want to move forward a little bit. We do have some more things we want to come to, but this obviously was the foundation, I think, of what eventually became your decision to resign. Throughout your tenure, you have spoken to this and many other issues, which you call injustices that should not be happening in the House of Assembly. It led to your decision to resign in February. Now, in an interview with our news reporter Kyle Walking, Dr. Kendall Major, the immediate past Speaker of the House of Assembly, said that your decision to resign indeed left the government in a peculiar place. I want us to listen in to what he had to say and pick up the conversation.
It really leaves the government in a conundrum, in a bad situation. I think this is a time when calmer heads should prevail, because the government now is faced with a situation where the relationship appeared to have deteriorated because of perhaps egos, because perhaps personalities, or turf warfare. If they try to prorogue the House, or they try to force the Speaker's hand, if they try to test the Speaker's authority, this could be a disaster. I wouldn't advise the government to do that at all. It was a moment where I felt that the chair was being, in my words, dishonored or disrespected to a degree. And of course, I didn't do it, but it was certainly a time where it crossed my mind. But I would not have resigned from the party. I would have resigned from the speakership and become a backbencher.
Dr. Kendall Major, your predecessor in that seat, speaking to your resignation, in looking back, and it's really not been that long ago, do you think your actions were extreme? Do you still stand by that decision to resign from the party and not resign from Speaker, as some people have said that you should have?
Well, actually, my decision is in keeping with the normal practice with the advanced democracies in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. What happens in the advanced democracies in the Parliamentary Association is that once a speaker is elected speaker, that member resigns from the party that he was elected on and become an independent speaker. And the reason for that, in my estimation, are obvious. If you are continuing as part of the party caucus that you are elected on, naturally, by that association, pressures will come from that party to persuade you to act in the best interest of that party. Likewise, you would naturally be attacked by the minority and opposition parties as being biased in favor of the majority party. Not only that, what happens on occasions is the majority party would take advantage of the association within the parliament and thereby make you appear to be biased in their favor.
And so I want to say to you that throughout my career, I have seen that happen. I have seen speakers almost take direction from the floor of the parliament. I've seen that happen. But I got to two things before we go to the break. It would appear, though, sir, from your decision, that you have lost confidence in the FNM and in seemingly in their ability to be the government. And secondly, how has that affected your ability to be speaker now that you have moved away from the majority party?
Well, I think it is better for the country and for the parliament for the speaker to be independent. For example, if I am trying to achieve a number of objectives as speaker, if I resign my position as speaker and go on the backbench, I would really be almost facilitating the continuance of the status quo. So my decision not to resign as speaker is because I believe that I can function better as speaker as an independent member of parliament. And I've seen the results. I've not had any challenges yet in terms of what I'm trying to achieve. The principal focus that I have really is the independence of the legislative branch. Some people seem to think that my purpose was to become an independent speaker. That's just a part of the and parcel of the nature of this evolution. The purpose really is to bring about the separation of powers and the independence of the legislative branch of the government.
Mr. Moultrie, we're going to have to take our first break in the show. We've got lots more to talk about. We invite the audience not to go anywhere. More On the Record with House Speaker. Our topic tonight, a House divided. The Honorable Halson Moultrie is my guest. We're both back right after this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and tonight we unravel a House divided, an in-depth look at what happens when an independent member sits as the Speaker of the House of Assembly. Sometime last month, House Speaker Halson Moultrie made a decision to overturn a ruling that was made by the former Speaker of the House, Dr. Kendall Major, regarding the scope and powers of the Public Accounts Committee. He hoped that this decision would improve democracy and enforce constitutional rights.
This is the ruling of this chair with respect to the decision made by former Speaker Dr. the Honorable Kendall Major on the scope and powers of the Public Accounts Committee made on the 13th day of May 2015. It is the ruling of this chair that that decision is now overturned and set aside. The oversight function of the executive branch has been diluted and diminished over the years by principally two areas. Administrations have refused to be answerable to the legislature. This is undemocratic and unconstitutional.
My guest tonight in studio is the Speaker of the House of Assembly, the Honorable Halson Moultrie. Mr. Moultrie, why was it important for you to take that decision on the Public Accounts Committee, and why was it necessary? What does this mean?
Well, the Public Accounts Committee is a part of the infrastructure or the construct of the Parliament. It is one of what we call the standing committees of the Parliament. It is different from a select committee in that it is the only committee in the Parliament that is controlled by the minority. And the reason for that is that the Public Accounts Committee must have the freedom to examine and investigate all expenditures of the taxpayers' money by the cabinet or the executive branch of the government. Any decision that weakens that oversight function of the Public Accounts Committee also weakens the oversight function of the legislative branch that is given under Article 72 of the Constitution.
Do you know why that was changed, sir? Why was that moved from under the minority?
Well, let me tell you why I believe it happened. We had a circumstance where the Public Accounts Committee, when the Free National Movement was in minority, wanted to examine some records of the urban renewal project. And the examination was blocked in a way by the ruling because, in my estimation, the Attorney General office, which the former speaker relied on for legal advice, was biased and prejudiced in its advice to the speaker in favor of the executive branch and the favorable outcome that the executive branch is seeking in that matter. That was one of the reasons why immediately upon becoming speaker, I made a determination that the speaker will not accept legal advice from the Attorney General office because the Attorney General is the lawyer for the executive branch of the government. The rules of procedure for the Parliament is very clear that the Speaker should seek independent legal advice.
So between 2017 when you all were elected and just recently, did you say to government, did you say to the party, did you say to the Parliament, by my estimation, this is wrong, this needs to move back to how it was set up before, it should be under the minority? And if you did, what was the response? Why didn't it happen until now?
Well, I need not say that to the Parliament. What really happened was that the leader of the opposition wrote several letters to the Speaker requesting that the decision of the former Speaker be reviewed. This Speaker took the decision that the opposition, who was then the government, had pressured the former Speaker into making that decision and that they should eat what they serve. When it became apparent, though, based on the activities that I see now happening, that there could be very well a snap election even before the budget debate in June, the urgency of not allowing that decision to remain as a stranglehold on the Public Accounts Committee, I was determined that it would be more detrimental to the democracy and the country if I did not make a decision before the House was dissolved.
A question on the two things that you said. You said that based on some things that you're seeing, which tells me that you have some concerns, or that's what it appears to be. And secondly, you said there could be a snap election by June. What indications are there that we could be moving towards that? And what things are there that are really concerning to you? And then, of course, this question of the election.
Well, first of all, the question of the election, it is apparent, and it is very unusual for both major parties to be on the ground, beginning a campaign in the middle of a pandemic, 1 year before the election, more than 1 year before the election is really scheduled to be held, the general elections. And then secondly, when we examine the state of our economy as a consequence of this pandemic, we realize right away that our number one revenue generator really is in shutdown mode, basically, right now. And the government has basically maxed out its borrowing capacity at preferred interest rate. So while the government may be able to generate monies to pay its bills by borrowing, those borrowings will be at a much higher rate. And if we look down the road a little bit, we can foresee the need for increased taxation to be able to deal with the increasing national debt. So I believe that no government or no majority party would want to proceed into general elections having just recently raised taxes. And so I see the real possibility of an early general election. Of course, the Prime Minister, by our Constitution, is the only person who knows when that election will be. But if he sees a favorable condition between now and May, it is very likely that he'll take advantage of it.
What do you see, though, as some of the major impediments facing now your former party on their quest to retain government?
Well, I believe that if you launch a campaign on the platform of transparency and accountability and allegations of corruption and plunder, you had better step forward and prove to the Bahamian people that you are transparent and accountable and that you are not corrupt. And so my position, particularly with respect to the parliament, is that I want to see the independence of the parliament. I want to see the Public Accounts Committee function at its maximum capacity. I want to see the executive branch of government being accountable to the legislative branch pursuant to Article 72. So I don't want to see, and I would not be encouraging the majority party to take advantage of loopholes in the rules, which in my estimation needs to be reviewed, to stop, for example, question time, to block question time, to circumvent the Constitution by not scheduling meetings on the second Wednesday in the month. And if by chance it slips through and a meeting is scheduled on the second Wednesday of the month, by passing a resolution to not go according to Rule 39.2, which sets up question time and private members' business by avoiding press question time through a resolution. If you are accountable.
I want us that's going to lead in now to my next question to you. Just recently, our news reporters had a chance to catch up with the chair of the House Rules Committee and leader of government business in Parliament, the Honourable Renwood Wells, regarding your decision to have the Prime Minister answer questions being placed to him. I want us to listen into what he said.
Chair of the House Rules Committee, Renwood Wells, says there is no provision made for the introduction of question and answer period specifically for the Prime Minister in the House of Assembly. Wells, who is also leader of government business in Parliament, defended government's record, claiming cabinet ministers answer questions every debate. Wells also making it clear that House members set the rules in Parliament.
There is a Rules Committee of which I'm chair, my simple comment is the rules of the House are set by the members.
Your response to that, sir, which in essence, he said, it's up to the majority to make the rules.
Well, listen, it's interesting that the member would make such a comment. First of all, the rules are made by the Parliament. The Constitution gives the Parliament the right to regulate itself under Article 55. Now, the rules of the House must always be read as a whole and not in isolation. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. If the Constitution provides you with the right to regulate yourself, whatever regulations and rules you put in place must be consistent with the Constitution and not ultra-virus the Constitution. So while the majority may be able to pass rules, it is the Speaker's domain as well as the judiciary, if matters are brought before the courts, to determine whether a rule is unconstitutional or ultra-virus the Constitution. So these rules must be read as a whole. And if we look at the rule, let me just read something for you. Rule 95, subsection 5 says the Speaker shall have and exercise the powers provided for that office by the Constitution, first of all, the Powers and Privileges Act, Senate and House of Assembly, Chapter 8, the rules of procedure, and shall have like powers as are exercised and held for the time being by the Speaker of the Commons House of Parliament of the United Kingdom, as far as the same may be applicable to this House and not inconsistent with the rules or practice of the House. So first of all, the rules must be read as a whole, conjunctively, not disjunctively, like the rules, the chairman of the Rules Committee seemed to be doing. The Rules Committee or procedure is only one part of the rules that must be taken into consideration. The Constitution supersedes all of the rules. The Powers and Privileges Act must be taken into consideration. The rules of procedure, and where those rules are silent, then we can go to the House of Commons. That is the motherland where we have question time for ministers and question time for the prime ministers. Now, this whole incident occurred as a result of the member for Golden Isles asking a number of questions with respect to land policy in his constituency because he had seen that the water well fields were being bulldozed. The prime minister was not in chambers at that time. When the deputy prime minister indicated to the parliament that the government has an obligation to answer questions. When the prime minister arrived a few minutes later, the prime minister rose to his feet and asked leave of the chair to answer the question raised by the member for Golden Isles. The chair acceded to the prime minister's request, and the prime minister then began to answer the questions by the member for Golden Isles. The member for Golden Isles had a few supplementary questions, which in effect set a precedent for the prime minister being questioned. At that moment, I indicated to the parliament that I am minded to institute a question time, which is similar to the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, whose rules become applicable to the Bahamas when our rules are silent. So there was no issue, really, in my estimation. The prime minister volunteered the answers, and I think that that was the right thing to do. All ministers of the government should be willing to answer questions by either the chair or any opposition member of parliament. And it seems unusual for the chairman of the Rules and Business Committee, who has yet to call a meeting of that Rules and Business Committee for the first time in this session since I became the speaker, despite my calls of more than almost a dozen calls for the Rules and Business Committee to meet and review the rules, to be suggesting that some weakness in the rules should prohibit the cabinet ministers from answering questions. It is also not correct to suggest that cabinet ministers answers questions all the time. Because if that is true, that would suggest that questions are being put to cabinet ministers all the time in every debate. And that also then begs the question, why then would you pass resolution or circumvent the Wednesdays, the second Wednesday in the month, by not scheduling the meeting of Parliament or the House of Assembly if you answer questions all the time? What then is the issue with you answering questions on the second Wednesday of the month?
Mr. Moultrie,
and since
go ahead. I'll allow you to finish. Go ahead.
Since I've become the speaker, we have never had question time. Every time the House meets on the second Wednesday of the month, since I became the speaker, the government moved a resolution to not to answer the question and to proceed with the other business of the House.
So as we go into the break, I just would say that these are many revelations that you are laying before us on this program. And it would seem to me that any government, any majority would take any opportunity to answer questions, particularly at a time like now when there are so many questions. And hopefully, between your actions and talking about it in this forum, hopefully there will be some move for that to happen. But when we return, folks, more on our conversation on a House divided with the 54th Speaker of the House of Assembly the Honourable Halson Moultrie. Stay with us. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and this is our final segment tonight. We're discussing a House divided. My guest is the Honourable Member of Parliament for the Nassau Village constituency, as well as he has the honour of being the 54th Speaker of the House of Assembly. The Honourable Halson Moultrie is my guest. So if we go back in history to 1967, to that election, history would record that the two major parties, the PLP and the UBP, ended that election in a tie. It was the support of Alvin Brennan out of Eleuthera and a Sir Randall Fox, who was the Labour Party candidate, that caused the PLP in that instance to get the majority. But in that instance, in history, we seemingly had a speaker who was independent of sorts. He didn't run under the PLP ticket, but he threw his weight behind the PLP and then went on to become the Speaker of the House. Do you see in the future of the Bahamas more independent members becoming Speaker, or do you think this is just a situation of circumstance?
Well, I am hopeful that the seeds sown in this initiative to bring about the independence of the Parliament will cause the deepening of democracy in the Bahamas to the point where we catch up with the more mature and advanced democracies of our parliamentary, Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. If that happens, it'll become a normal and expected procedure for any member elected by the minority or majority party who the members vote in as Speaker to resign from his party's affiliation and become an independent Speaker. That is the trend and the movement within the advanced democracies.
So it'll almost be automatic then. If you are elected Speaker, then you resign from the party. Why is that a good thing?
That is a good thing because it frees the Speaker from apparent bias. You see, the Speaker is supposed to be impartial, but it is very difficult to appear to be impartial once you are continually affiliated with the party that you were elected on. Because first of all, what happens is, in my experience was, whenever I had an issue with the opposition party, the opposition party would find itself in Nassau Village and would be calling the Speaker everything but a child of God. But the Speaker's hands would then be bound because of his role as Speaker to defend his position as the representative of Nassau Village. So what happens in the advanced democracies is the Speaker becomes independent. The major parties decide that they're not going to oppose his seat for one term. So speakers then would be able to serve at least 2 terms minimum. And after the second term, the Speaker then would resign. That would also give his deputy an opportunity to have gained some experience, or some other person to have gained some experience, and we won't be put in a circumstance like Dr. Kendall Major was and I was, where the very first day we entered Parliament. We were elected Speaker without having any parliamentary historical experience within the chamber, even though we might have been able to research and to view the proceedings of other parliaments, we would have been new
Now, so I have
in
to
our
ask
role.
you. I have to ask you this though. Where does that leave your constituents? Because as Speaker, the reality is there are very few opportunities, if any, for you to express your views on certain matters, to make your views known on legislation and things of that matter. So, one, where does that leave your constituents when you serve as Speaker? And secondly, if you're talking about resigning, the Speaker resigning from the party almost automatically, again, where does that leave your constituents who, for the most part, will rely on the majority to get things done?
Well, two things usually happen. In my case, the deputy speaker who is able to participate in debates, and the member for Pinewood, who is on the border of Nassau Village on the western side. We've worked an arrangement where I would bring my matters to them. They would bring those matters forward during their presentations, and initially there was an exceptional relationship with the speaker and a number of ministers, where when I needed or had some issue in Nassau Village, I would go and speak with ministers, and ministers would do their best to assist.
You said
I must
initially, has that broken down or is that still in existence?
I must admit that has sort of broken down a bit since I started taking some strong positions with respect to the separation of powers and the independence of the parliament. Some members of parliament, particularly the cabinet members, felt that such an initiative was really an indication that they were doing something wrong, which was totally not the case. The position always was that there is a conflict in the doctrine of the separation of powers if the cabinet is controlling the court system or controlling the legislative branch of the government. It had nothing to do with who the members of the cabinet might be. And I made that clear in several presentations that it was wrong under Sir Lyndon, wrong under Hubert Ingram, it was wrong under Perry Christie, and if it continues, it will be wrong under Hubert Minnis.
You have a situation, sir, where the Attorney General is in the cabinet, a position that's appointed by the Prime Minister. Do you feel that the Attorney General needs to be more of an independent position as well?
No, the Attorney General really is the attorney for the executive branch of the government. There's no conflict there. That is clear. His purpose is to defend and to advise the executive branch of the government. But he cannot also interfere with the proceedings of the legislative branch. He shouldn't, let's put it that way. Nor should he tend to interfere with anything that the Chief Justice may decide he wants for the judicial
You feel that happens?
branch. Well, basically, if you look at the history of court appointments and so on, you can see political interference with the appointment of judges. I wouldn't go any further than that. But that in itself should never happen.
So what is the nature of your relationship with the Prime Minister? I mean, you were a member of the party up until now, even though you operated seemingly as independent because the Speaker really should be an independent role. Even there, you're there to ensure that the government moves forward with its agenda in the House, but also to protect the rights of the minorities in there as well. But what's been your relationship with the Prime Minister? Have you all had any discussions about your decision prior to this? Is it adversarial? Is it one of mutual respect? What is it?
In the beginning, the Prime Minister was very receptive, and on a number of occasions he indicated that he supports the concept of the separation of powers and the independence of the legislative branch of the government. But within a 5-year interval, um, time moves very quickly. And while you may be giving favorable answers and responses, if your initiatives are stalling and not moving ahead, then you have to press on to try and get it and try and get it done. And so the relationship has deteriorated to some degree, but we still have a professional relationship with respect to um, the Speaker and the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice. That we are co-equals as the heads of government. There's three arms of the government set up by the Constitution. And the Prime Minister is head of the executive branch, the Speaker is head of the legislative branch, and the Chief Justice is head of the judicial or the judiciary. And so there should be a coming together, as is with the Holy Spirit, with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. All should be one.
I don't think that the public sees it as that at all. But sir, you would have been, and you have been, and you continue to be Speaker at probably one of the most historic periods in the life of this country, and that is during this actual pandemic, when we have seen the restriction of basic freedoms and movement for the sake of our safety. Many of the orders that have come out through the Prime Minister as the competent authority have been criticized, even with the multiple extensions of the emergency orders. We see a lot of criticism for that. As you have sat through these proceedings, sir, and you've been in the House when many of these measures have been passed, what has been your experience, particularly when you see people, railing against what they see as the loss of civil liberties?
Well, the major challenge, I believe, is always once we have a pandemic of this nature, is the restrictions that will appear to be loss of liberty. And I believe the government has erred in not coming to Parliament as frequently as I believe they should with orders or any change in orders, so that at minimum the Parliament itself could appear to be in a regulatory role, an oversight role. When the Governor General gives the proclamation, the law provides that in 14 days, if you want to extend it, you should come to the Parliament for that extension. And that implies also that the Parliament should participate in the process. That 14 days is not written in stone with respect to the government having to return to Parliament every 14 days. But in my estimation, it would have been better in terms of balancing what needs to be done with respect to some of these orders. If they are ventilated in Parliament every 14 days or so. Because what has happened is, in some instances, orders have been in place over certain islands, certain communities. The circumstances change for the better, but the order is still in place. Mm-hmm. Then you have persons arguing that the order is applicable to one grouping of persons and not applicable to the other grouping of persons. But if you take a break of 2 and 3 months before you return to Parliament to deal with extending these orders, then you open yourself up to all sort of speculation.
Agreed. So our final question, though, and we're just about out of time. With the arrival of the COVID-19 vaccine and the imminent distribution of that, will you, I think you've spoken about this, will you encourage other Bahamians to take it, to participate, given the large number of individuals in our society who are seemingly at risk, given the large number of comorbidities that we have?
Well, I happen to be one of those persons with comorbidities, but I also happen to have some scientific training and background. And until I am satisfied that the science has gone into the testing of these vaccines to determine possible future side effects of those vaccines. I am not inclined to get on the front line to be to take the vaccine and to risk the unknown, basically. So while I think the vaccine is a good intervention with respect to eradicating this pandemic, I believe that more testing is necessary so that persons can understand the risks involved in taking these vaccines.
But do you think, sir, that there is an inherent risk in not taking it, considering the situation that we find ourselves in medically and economically?
Well, there is a risk. That's why I say we have to try and balance it, because there is a risk if we don't take it. Then we have to really hope and pray that the populace would abide by and adhere to the various protocols. And I don't see that happening really
People are
now.
tired of the protocols. So we're running out of patience with all of the restrictions, even though there is an easing of it, and there has to be. I'm asking because the question is, what's the way out?
Yes, I think the vaccine, based on what I've seen in terms of the news reports and what I've read, it appears now that they're suggesting that if you take the vaccine, you no longer have to wear the mask, you no longer have to physically distance yourself, and you can gather in larger numbers and so on. But even that, while that is good, that is yet to be tested.
We have to
what
see
the consequence of that would be.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. We could have gone on for so much longer. I had so many more questions to raise with you, but I want to begin by thanking you for giving us this opportunity to talk and allowing you to tell your story and to give us such a great history and civics lesson. I have to tell you, I learned a lot, and I sat in the House of Assembly as a reporter for well over a decade, and today I've learned quite a bit just by sitting here and talking to you. So thank you so very much. So thank you for your service to country and what you have done. And you've taken a very bold step, and it'll be interesting to see now how history will measure that. But again, thank you, all the best to you. And certainly, I'm going to extend an invitation for you to come back in the future as we certainly move into the election process and we continue our discussion. So again, thank you, sir. All the best to you, and continue to stay safe.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. That's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record, A House Divided. Special thank you to my guest, the Honourable Halson Moultrie. On behalf of my technical team, myself, and all of us here at On the Record, thank you so much for watching. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Same time, same place, right here on the Record. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page.